When I was in middle school, I did something terrible. At that time, I thought it wasn't a big deal, and I even secretly felt relieved that no one found out. But when I learned the full truth of what happened, I felt utterly hopeless and even wanted to end my own life. A scumbag like me is destined for hell. During my middle school years, I was considered one of the top students in my class. Although my grades weren't the best, I made up for it with my maturity and responsibility. Compared to my immature peers, I seemed much more mature. Thanks to my social skills, I had good relationships with my classmates. They took me as trustworthy, and my teachers thought I was well educated. However, only I knew the truth. All of this was the result of careful effort on my part. In reality, I wasn't as calm as seemed. Deep down, I was insecure and gloomy, often harboring dark thoughts. I had started smoking and skipping class as early as primary school. When I entered middle school, I made up my mind to start over and act like a good student. But all of that eventually fell apart. It all started in my second year of middle school. That year, a girl named Zara Finn transferred into our class and sat in front of me. She was cold and distant, never smiling or talking, giving off an unapproachable feeling. She always sat in front of me, never turning around. If she had turned around, I wouldn't have been surprised even if she had no facial features. Years later, I often had nightmares like that. To be honest, I can't remember Zara's face clearly. It was probably an unremarkable, forgettable face. But I do remember some small details. Her hair was jet black, neatly tied back, and her neck was slender and pale. She always kept her head down, so the two vertebrae on her neck were visible, sharp and fragile looking. Her collar was always neatly ironed, never stained with sweat. Her shirt was always tidy, with no wrinkles except around her shoulder blades. I couldn't help but stare at her. During morning reading, when the sunlight slanted in, the fine hairs on her neck glistened, and her clothes gave off a fresh soapy scent. I peeked out from behind my book, gazing at her back. Why did I always look at her? I couldn't explain it. One day I finally couldn't take it anymore. I dropped a pen near Zara's feet and tapped her shoulder, asking her to pick it up for me. She slowly picked it up and handed it back to me without looking at me. I often used opportunities like handing out homework or collecting papers to walk around to her front and see what she was doing, usually organizing her pencil case as if she had a particular obsession with the order of her stationery. Later, my curiosity about her grew stronger, and I started tapping her shoulder more often, trying to strike up conversations. What did you have for dinner last night? Do you know how to solve this problem? I can teach you. Do you not talk to your mom at home either? But Zara always turned around with an expressionless face, her head down, silent and cold, as if she hadn't heard me at all. She did that to everyone. In class, she often kept her head down, not seeming to pay attention, so her grades were always at the bottom. At first, the classmates were friendly to Zara, but no one could handle her coldness for a long time, so they eventually stopped trying. Only I kept trying to get close to her. We all knew there was something wrong with Zara. She had autism, a neurodevelopmental disorder that couldn't be cured. The only option was early intervention to make the condition less severe. The fact that she could now maintain emotional stability, have some self-care abilities, and sit in a regular middle school classroom was the result of her family's relentless efforts. Of course, there was another reason. The school also gave her special care because her mother was our geography teacher. My attention to Zara was obvious. Some classmates speculated that I was trying to curry favor with the teacher by getting close to her daughter, but then again, geography was just a minor subject, so there was no need to go to such lengths for it. So the more common rumor was that I had a crush on Zara. The classmates didn't say anything on the surface, but privately they said I had strange tastes. I had no way to defend myself. Zara's mother, Luna Lu, was grateful that I was willing to interact with her daughter. She called me to her office, treated me snacks, and asked me to continue helping Zara. Luna was gentle and beautiful, with a warm smile that made her seem like a breath of spring, completely different from her cold daughter. Zara's father had left long ago, shortly after she was diagnosed. For over a decade, Luna had raised her daughter alone, spending everything she had on intervention courses, patiently teaching her how to live, how to communicate, and correcting her abnormal behaviors. She never gave up. A gentle spring breeze trying to melt an iceberg, it was a daunting task. Even after all these years, Zara remained emotionally cold, with poor learning abilities, unwilling to speak, and hadn't called her mother Mom in 2 years. Luna loved nature, which was why she chose geography as her major. She also loved humanity, which was why she chose teaching as her profession. She loved everything in this world, but her daughter loved nothing. It was hard to imagine how this pair of mother and daughter had relied on each other for so long, survival, and how Luna had managed to persist this hopeless journey year after year. Actually, Luna didn't need to ask me specifically. I would naturally be drawn to Zara and try to talk to her. Zara seemed to have a natural pull on me. I knew it wasn't love, but if it wasn't love, why did I keep approaching her? This confused me too. Zara had a face that was both plain and cold, almost causing a physical discomfort. No one would like her except her mother. She even scared me. Countless times I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat from nightmares about my middle school days. Back then, I was still young and I didn't fully understand some things. I just followed my instincts. But sometimes, understanding things too clearly isn't necessarily a good thing. Let me talk about myself. My name is Jason Harper, and in my second year of middle school, I met Zara. To rewind a bit, when I was in second grade, my parents divorced. Since my dad had money, I lived with him. That was the reason, I told myself. But in reality, it was because my mom didn't want me. My mom looked delicate but was strong-willed and couldn't tolerate any wrongdoing. Because of my dad's affair and my hiding it from her, she left us without hesitation. I tried to explain to my mom that I hid my dad's affair because I was afraid they would divorce, not because I wanted to lie. I told her I was a good kid, had good personality, good grades, good looking, and a strong work ethic, and that I would take care of her in the future. I listed all my good qualities, trying to prove my worth and hoping she would fight for custody of me, but she didn't want to. Because I missed my mom, I often cried at home, holding on to her clothes. My dad said I wasn't manly enough, took my mom's clothes, threw them away, and locked me in my room to reflect. I watched from the window as the cleaning truck took my mom's clothes away. When my dad cooked, I said it didn't taste good, so he threw it out and didn't spoil me. Instead, he gave me 100 yuan. When I got hungry, I would naturally go downstairs to buy food. My dad was a businessman and didn't have time for me, so most of the time, I was free. I followed my mom to her workplace and found out where she lived now. I knocked on her door. My mom was surprised and pulled me inside, looking me up and down. She said my face was dirty, my hair hadn't been cut a long time, and my clothes smelled and had yellowed collars. She made me take a bath, cooked me a bowl of noodles, took me to get a haircut, and then we went to the park. I wrote about that day in a composition titled, An Unforgettable Day, but my teacher didn't understand why it was so unforgettable. After that, I went to see my mom every week, sometimes deliberately making myself dirty so she would scold me more. But after a while, my mom got tired of it. She said I was growing up and needed to learn to take care of myself. By the time I was in 4th grade, my mom became very cold toward me. Before, she would spend the whole day with me, but later, she would only stay for a few minutes before finding an excuse to leave, telling me to go home. Several times she wasn't even at home and I couldn't get in, so I had to go back. Later, my mom remarried, moved away, changed jobs, and changed her phone number. For the entire 5th grade, I didn't see her. That year, I was very depressed. I didn't comb my hair, wash my face, or change my clothes for a month, going to school looking like a mess. At school, I didn't study well and I was extremely sensitive, cursing and fighting over the smallest things. My classmates didn't want to be around me. My teacher talked to my dad about my behavior, but before discussing anything else, she said, "At least clean the kid up. He looks like a homeless child." My dad nodded and agreed, but the next day he forgot. He was too busy to pay much attention to me, at most giving me a few hundred yuan to take my clothes to the laundromat and buy some snacks to smooth things over with my classmates. But many problems were still left for me to deal with on my own. In the end, it wasn't a big deal. I was just lost, not knowing where I was headed, unable to find hope. Once I overheard a classmate's mom say, "He has no manners. You can tell he doesn't have a mom from his behavior." I was suddenly terrified and didn't want to go to school anymore. I started skipping class, wandering the streets, going to black market internet cafes to play games, and even learned to smoke. Sometimes I would go to the park where my mom used to take me and sit there doing nothing for hours. Days passed like this. Then one day during the new year, I saw my mom from a distance, holding a little girl's hand, walking in the park. I rubbed my eyes, making sure I wasn't mistaken. It was really her. I quickly stood up, brushed the grass off my pants, and was about to run over when I noticed the little girl next to her. She wasn't my mom's biological child. She was her new husband's daughter, but my mom treated her as her own, dressing her up in cute, puffy pink down jackets. The girl was holding a candied hawthorn stick, skipping along, her face full of joy from being loved. I was so angry that my head felt like it was going to explode. I rushed over, kicked the girl to the ground, and snatched her candied hawthorn stick. The girl burst into tears, and my mom quickly picked her up, checking her over while comforting her, then slapped me across the face. My face burned instantly and the frostbite on my cheeks broke open, itching and hurting at the same time. I always remembered my mom saying that the skin on my face was delicate and I shouldn't scratch it too much to avoid leaving scars. So even when my frostbite itched unbearably, I never touched it. But now, with that slap, the pain went straight to my heart, yet it also brought a strange sense of relief. It was as if everything had finally been answered. My mom looked down at me coldly and said something. I couldn't hear her. My ears were ringing. I just watched as she turned around and walked away with the girl, not looking back even once. I finished the candied hawthorn stick, lingered for a while, and then left. After that, I didn't dare go back to that park. When I got home, I came down with a bad cold, feverish and delirious. In my half-asleep state, I thought I heard my mom's footsteps nearby. I cried out for her, reaching out to grab her, babbling through my tears, but the mom in my nightmare didn't stay. In the end, I struggled to get up and called my dad, who was away on a business trip. He rushed back overnight and saved me. During the summer before middle school, I started learning to take care of myself. I cooked my own meals, did my laundry, ironed my clothes, scrubbed the collars clean, and got regular haircuts. Before school started, I washed my backpack, bought new stationery, and learned how to wrap my textbooks. I stopped fighting, cursing, smoking, and skipping class. I knew how to behave like a well-mannered person. I brought balanced breakfast to school and shared cut fruit with my classmates during breaks. I didn't want anyone to find out I didn't have a mom. That was more important to me than studying. Maintaining this image was hard. Besides doing homework, I had to do a lot of things to make it seem like I was being pampered by my parents, and many people got all of this effortlessly. They took for granted what they were born with as naturally as breathing air. They casually talked about what their moms said, the snacks their moms prepared, the new clothes their moms bought, never realizing how privileged they were. Their casual remarks made me sad for a long time. But I couldn't stay vulnerable forever. I gradually let go of my resentment toward my classmates. I only cared about the girl sitting in front of me. The girl in front of me had an incurable disease, a strange personality, terrible grades, and lacked self-care skills. She was a complete mess. But her hair was always neatly combed, her neck was always clean, her collars were never yellow, her clothes were never wrinkled, and she always smelled nice. All these details were manifestations of being loved. Her mom had raised her so well. Why did such a messed up child still have a mom who wanted her? But my mom didn't want me? I finally understood. The reason I couldn't help but get close to Zara wasn't because I liked her, but because I liked the way she was loved wholeheartedly. I wasn't envious of the meticulous care. I could take care of myself. I was envious of the fact that no matter how unpopular she was, no matter how bad she was, she didn't have to be afraid because her mom loved her. Several times during breaks, I saw Luna walk over to Zara's desk, squat down, and speak to her softly, stroking her hair. I watched from behind, my eyes burning with jealousy. After Luna left, I would quickly tap Zara's shoulder. I kept trying to get close to her, trying to learn about their lives, but she always remained expressionless and silent. I couldn't help but pay attention to her, talk to her, but after talking, I would feel angry. It was like performing a one-man show while she watched coldly, probably laughing at me in her heart. Sometimes, while talking to her, dark thoughts would pop into my head. I wanted to slap her, to crack that poker face of hers, to make her cry. But I didn't dare. I would immediately remember what happened that day in the park. She had her mom to protect her. She had an innate sense of security that I didn't. I couldn't take this daily torment anymore. Let's think carefully. There's nothing in this world that can't be solved. Why did Zara have such a good life? Was it all just fate? Couldn't I fight for it myself? If only Luna could become my mom, how great would that be? Suddenly, I had an idea. If a mom could replace her child, then I could replace my mom. Luna was divorced and my dad was divorced too. They could totally form a new family. Luna was tight on money and my dad had plenty. My dad had become sloppy and greasy after the divorce, and he even developed stomach problems from not eating on time. Luna could probably keep him in line. Luna had so much love, all of it given to Zara, but she got nothing in return. Zara was cold and emotionless, naive to the point of cruelty, not even calling her mom. What a waste. What Zara wasted was exactly what I longed for. If Luna became my mom, I could share in her love. Maybe at first, Luna wouldn't truly love me, but I would always be good to her, take care of her, and repay her. I believed my sincerity would eventually win her over. If Zara and I became siblings, I might even start to like her. I would take on the role of an older brother and take good care of her. This was a perfect plan. I just needed to find a way to get them married. Although I had some dark thoughts at the beginning, my ideas were still relatively normal. Things hadn't spiraled out of control yet. To get Luna and my dad to marry, I needed to plant the seeds in their hearts, to make two strangers develop an interest in each other. I had to be the bridge connecting them, pulling strings from both sides. Handling my dad's side wasn't a problem. The hard part was Luna's side. To make Luna interested in my dad, I first needed to win her affection and trust. So, on top of what I was already doing, I started taking even more meticulous care of Zara. I observed the interactions between the mother and daughter at school, offering help whenever they needed it, doing all sorts of chores, as long as it was related to Zara. But since we were of different genders, there were limits to what I could do in terms of personal care. Mostly I just chatted with Zara, helped her with meals, and explained homework to her. Whether she listened or not was another matter. The main goal was to let Luna see my efforts. Luna was suspicious of my excessive enthusiasm, which I had anticipated. I told her that Zara looked a lot like a cousin of mine, and I had always taken care of that cousin. Unfortunately, after my parents divorced, I lost contact with my mom's side of the family. Seeing Zara now felt like seeing my cousin again, and it made me feel close to her. This answer not only revealed that my dad was divorced but also hinted at a sibling-like bond. I also mentioned that I really liked geography and Luna's teaching style. Seeing how hard Luna worked, I wanted to do my part to help. Besides, I sat right behind Zara, so helping her was only natural. I was a good student, and Luna had a good impression of me, so she quickly dismissed her doubts. In turn, Luna started to care about me. When she came to check on Zara during breaks, she would chat with me for a bit. When she prepared snacks for Zara, she would bring some for me too. During study hall, she would invite us to her office to do homework, and she even took me to her house for meals a few times. The feeling of being cared for again filled me with joy. Even though I was at school, it felt like I was at home. Luna was gentle and kind, and she was beautiful too. Although I called her teacher, in my heart I already saw her as my mom. To make Luna like me even more, I studied harder and my grades improved dramatically, jumping from the top 10 in the class to number 1. I pretended to be interested in geography, doing a lot of extra work in the subject and often asking Luna questions. Over time, the pretense became real, and I even won an award in a geography competition. Luna praised me for being smart and quick to learn, but then she sighed softly, her gaze falling on Zara, who was sitting with her head down, fiddling with a pencil. I knew she was comparing Zara and me. I liked the feeling of being compared. Zara was slow in both academics and daily life. What other kids could learn in minutes might take her months. You could never tell if she was keeping her head down because she wasn't listening, didn't understand, or just didn't want to respond. She couldn't be motivated or discouraged. She was like a stagnant pool of water. No matter what fell into it, there would be no ripples, just a slow sinking into the dark depths, disappearing without a trace. Her response didn't matter to me because I was just putting on an act. But for Luna, it was different. She genuinely wanted Zara to improve. For years, Luna had been extremely patient, repeating things over and over, teaching her again and again. But there were moments when she broke down. Once, I peeked through the office window and saw Luna scolding and hitting Zara, slapping her palms, pulling her ears, shaking her violently, crying and shouting, "Look at me. Are you even listening? Say something." What? What did I do to deserve this? What am I supposed to do with you? Why is everyone else fine but you're like this? Zara didn't resist. She just let out dry sobs. Her face twisted into an unnatural expression, looking extremely abnormal. This scene played out in slow motion in my mind. I watched the mother and daughter with a sense of pity, wishing this moment would last longer so I could imprint it in my memory and analyze it carefully. Look closely, Luna's expression was filled with so many complex emotions: pain, despair, helplessness, resentment. She was excellent and hardworking, becoming a top-rated teacher before she was 40. Other teachers at her level had happy families, successful children, and lived in nice neighborhoods. But she was divorced, raising a child with autism alone, living in a shabby old apartment. The school praised her, and the media reported on her, always using the word strong in the headlines. She had so many great qualities, but all of them were overshadowed by her strength. But wasn't strength also a burden? She had no choice but to be strong. She had persevered through sheer willpower and a heavy sense of responsibility, but after half a lifetime of hard work, she saw no hope in her daughter. Even if her daughter was slow, couldn't she at least call her mom? Nothing. She was just a piece of wood, devoid of emotion or intelligence. A child like this, even if she was pure and innocent in nature, was essentially a vampire, endlessly sucking the life out of her mother, dragging her down into an abyss with no future. From the moment this child was born, her mother's tragic fate was sealed. Her mother had no other options. She was determined to walk this path to the end. I truly felt sorry for Luna. In the office, Luna hugged Zara and cried uncontrollably. After hitting her, she regretted it, constantly scolding herself and apologizing. Zara let out a few dry sobs when she was hit, but soon her face went blank again, letting her mother hold her without a word. Suddenly, her eyes mechanically turned and she looked at me through the window. Then she grinned, as if she was laughing. The suddenness of her gaze and smile startled me. For a moment, I wondered if she understood everything. After that, I was depressed for a few days and didn't talk to Zara. If I didn't talk to her, she wouldn't remember me. She always faced forward, sitting upright, her back never touching my desk, not even a strand of hair falling on my desk. She was so close, yet so far away. Later, one day, I went to Luna's office to ask her about a problem and noticed she looked tired, so I asked if she was okay. She couldn't help but pour out her frustrations, but then she stopped herself and said, "Why am I telling you all this? You're just a kid." I thought for a moment and then comforted her. Every child is a gift. Maybe Zara has a talent in something else that we haven't discovered yet. She's actually very observant. Even though she doesn't respond when you talk to her, she's listening. She knows how much you love her, she just can't express it. She's already improved a lot compared to before and she'll keep getting better. You just have to believe in her. Luna sighed and said, "Jason, you're a good kid. You're so young, but you already know how to comfort people. Your parents raised you well." I seized the opportunity and said, "It's all thanks to my dad. He's really busy now and just gives me money, but it's not like he's neglecting me. He already did his part earlier. He spent a lot of time with me when I was young, teaching me how to behave and how to be independent. My dream is to become a man like my dad. I'm sure my dad would never have imagined he'd be praised like this." After that, I often brought up my dad in conversation, embellishing the reasons for their divorce and highlighting his achievements as a highly educated, successful entrepreneur with a strong sense of responsibility. I admit I was being selfish. Luna developed a good impression of my dad, so that part of the plan was successful. As for my dad, I didn't need to put in much effort. I just casually mentioned that my geography teacher was a single mom raising a daughter and that she was very kind to me. I told him that my grades had improved thanks to her encouragement and that I'd won a geography competition because of her guidance. I also mentioned that she was a great cook. My dad got the hint and said he'd make a point to thank Luna at the next parent-teacher meeting. That part of the plan was also set. I had laid all the groundwork. Whether they would hit it off when they met was out of my hands, but I thought there was a good chance. Given my dad's personality, he'd like Luna as soon as he saw her. My dad wasn't bad-looking either, and he'd clean up before the parent-teacher meeting so he wouldn't come off as too sloppy. Luna would probably like him too. Soon, the parent-teacher meeting arrived. During the meeting, only the main subject teachers spoke, so Luna didn't attend. After the meeting, my dad specifically went to Luna's office to thank her and gave her an expensive hand cream, saying he'd brought it back from a business trip. Luna was polite and praised me a bit but didn't accept the gift. They talked for about half an hour. I watched their expressions from outside the office and thought there might be something there. In the end, they exchanged contact information, saying it would be convenient for discussing my academic progress. That night, my dad said he planned to invite Luna out for dinner over the weekend to discuss my studies. A few days later, I overheard Luna tentatively asking Zara, "Would you like to have a dad?" I was overjoyed. They had hit it off and everything was moving in the direction I wanted. But the adult world isn't that simple. Marriage is a big deal, not child's play, especially since I had overlooked one crucial detail. My dad didn't know about Zara's condition. Over the weekend, my dad and Luna met up. On the surface, they were discussing my studies, but they were also subtly probing each other's family backgrounds. That way, even if things didn't work out, it wouldn't be too awkward. Luna was quite honest and told my dad about Zara's condition. My dad didn't stay silent for long. He politely expressed his concern, but after that, the conversation became more cautious. By the time they parted ways, the discussion was still centered around academics, and they didn't set a date to meet again. They both knew what that meant. When my dad came back, he didn't mention anything about it. I waited for a while, but I couldn't hold back. During dinner, I casually said, "I learned this dish from Luna. Her cooking is really good. It'd be great if she could be my mom." My dad immediately replied, "Luna Lou? No way." He said that a divorced woman with a child, especially one with a disability, would have a hard time remarrying. If Luna were single, things would be simpler. Then he added, "That's also why your mom didn't want you." Those words hit me hard. I stood up angrily and said, "You're the one who's judging Luna? She might not even like you. You're the one who cheated and now I'm paying the price." I ran back to my room crying and slammed the door. No matter how much I told myself not to think about it, my dad's last sentence kept echoing in my ears. I couldn't stop thinking about my mom. Even now, though I'm not as obsessed with her as I used to be, I'm still struggling with the pain of not having a mom. But to my mom, I was just a burden. I didn't understand why I was the burden, but Zara wasn't. Why did everyone say I was a good kid, but I was still unwanted? No matter how angry or resentful I was, I couldn't change that fact. Luna was truly a good person. She had sacrificed so much for Zara. Whether it was out of love or a sense of responsibility, she never gave up on her. If she had abandoned Zara, like my own mom had done to me, I wouldn't have wanted her to be my mom either. It was precisely because I saw how well Zara was cared for that I liked Luna. But because Luna wouldn't give up on Zara, my dad didn't want her. She couldn't become my mom. It was a dilemma. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, feeling lost again. How should I act toward Luna and Zara tomorrow? Should I keep trying to please them? But what was the point? The reality was right there. No matter how much I tried to please them, they wouldn't get married. It was all futile. My dad was a decisive person. Once he made up his mind, he wouldn't change it. Luna wasn't so stunning that my dad would lose his senses over her. As I lay there thinking, I eventually fell into a restless sleep. In my dream, I was back in the office watching Luna scold Zara, then break down in tears, hugging her tightly. Zara's face remained blank. Her eyes mechanically turned and she looked at me, grinning with a cold, pale smile. I tried to run, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as her smile grew wider and more distorted. I woke up in a cold sweat. That night, I sat in the dark and a thought suddenly crossed my mind. If Zara disappeared, Luna would be free. If only Zara were dead. I shook my head violently, trying to rid myself of that terrible thought, but I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. After that day, while I was still trying to figure out my next move, I continued to be nice to Zara. Luna treated me the same as before, but I could sense a hint of awkwardness in her gaze when she looked at me. Although my dad had been subtle, his displeasure with Zara was obvious, and that was only natural. Luna was a sensible person. Still, a rift had formed between us. A few days later, Luna called me to her office. We chatted about my studies for a while, and then she mentioned that everyone would be busy with academics in the third year, and helping Zara with her homework would take up a lot of my time. She didn't want to burden me too much. I replied that it was no trouble at all, and helping a classmate was only natural. We went back and forth like this for a while, but Luna had no choice but to let me continue. During a break, I sat next to Zara and showed her how to solve a math problem. She kept her head down, her ponytail covering her face. I caught a whiff of the fragrance in her hair and got distracted. A classmate nearby joked, "Are you tutoring your girlfriend again?" I usually ignored such joke, but this time I actually thought about it. Why not just marry Zara? That way, Luna would become my mother-in-law, which would be close enough to having her as my mom. My dad would never agree, so I just cut ties with him. But I was only 15, far from the legal age for marriage. And if I was being honest with myself, did I really want to spend my life with someone like her? No, I didn't. I was only nice to Zara to impress Luna. I didn't like her. In fact, I even disliked her. I hated her expressionless face, her indifferent demeanor, her lack of response to Luna's love, her waste of precious emotions and social resources, her utter uselessness and the burden she placed on others. In short, this plan wouldn't work. Was there another way? I thought back to that night, to that sinful idea. I always tried to forget it, but once it surfaced, it was hard to suppress. It kept popping up, especially when I felt helpless, reminding me of its feasibility, telling me it was the best, most permanent solution. No matter how much I tried to avoid it, I always circled back to it, until I was completely consumed by darkness. Murder, such a terrifying word. But killing Zara would be doing the world a favor, right? Deep down, Luna probably wanted to be free too. She had been holding on out of a sense of duty. She must have had the thought, even if only for a moment, that life would be better without Zara. But she was bound by the chains of motherly love. I was out of options. I had no other choice. This was the last resort. Once I started seriously considering murder, I lost my humanity. Once I crossed that psychological barrier, my thoughts spiraled out of control, plunging into an endless abyss. To kill Zara without anyone knowing, I'd have to make it look like an accident or a suicide. Autistic individuals are prone to suicidal tendencies, so I wouldn't even need to do much to make people suspect that. It was a natural advantage. I started scouting the area for tall buildings and rivers, places suitable for suicide. But there were too many surveillance cameras around, so if I took her there, I wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. Besides, Zara was always with Luna outside of class, so I couldn't take her anywhere alone. The best option was to make Zara want to die. If she developed suicidal thoughts, the opportunities would multiply. For example, she could jump off the building during a break. No matter how closely Luna watched her, she couldn't prevent that. But that was easier said than done. I could only try. I read a lot of psychology books and found that hypnosis was the best method, but that wasn't realistic. For one, I was just a middle school student. No matter how much I studied, I couldn't reach the level of a professional psychologist. Secondly, hypnosis required a quiet, enclosed environment and uninterrupted time, and again I couldn't take Zara anywhere alone. All I could do was plant suggestions in her mind, applying psychological pressure. During breaks, while I was explaining a problem to Zara, I whispered in her ear. The classmates all say you're too dumb, and your mom's life is ruined because of you. She's wasted her whole life on you. She could have been so happy, but I think you've done well to last this long. If I were you, I would have killed myself already. It's not like you'll ever get better. There's no future for you. If I were you, I wouldn't want to burden my mom. I could safely plant these dark thoughts in Zara's mind, feeding her a sense of despair. She wouldn't tell Luna, she never spoke. But inducing someone to commit suicide is incredibly difficult. There are too many uncontrollable factors, and it's hard to predict when it might take effect, especially when dealing with someone whose mind is already impaired. The things I fed her might not even register, and I had to avoid being noticed by others. By then, my own mental state was deteriorating. Saying such horrible things every day was taking a toll on me. But no matter how much I said, Zara showed no reaction. I still had to watch as she and her mom grew closer. Eventually, I gave up. By the third year of middle school, academics became more intense. I was exhausted just keeping up with my studies, and I still had to devote mental energy to Luna's situation. I clung to that faint hope, not wanting to let it go. There had to be another way. I was stuck in a rut, but the mother and daughter seemed to have found a new path and were eagerly exploring it. Before, I would always linger in Luna's office after school, but now, as soon as classes ended, Luna and Zara would leave and the office door would be locked. Geography classes became less frequent in the third year, so Luna appeared less often. At the same time, Zara started taking frequent absences. Occasionally I'd see Luna, and she looked much better than before. What was going on? Luna had been very worried about Zara's academic performance, but now she seemed to have had an epiphany. I often stared at the empty seat in front of me, wondering what the mother and daughter were up to. Had they given up on school or were they avoiding me? The more I thought about it, the more it hurt. Every day I didn't see them, I was consumed by anxiety. There was no need to avoid me, was there? What had I done to deserve that? No, it probably had nothing to do with me. They had their own lives. Who was I to them? All along, I had been the one suffering. When I saw Luna again, she and Zara were both a bit tanned. They said they'd been hiking outdoors. I hadn't expected them to disappear for half a month just for that. Luna seemed to be in a good mood and warmly greeted me, even inviting me to her house for dinner. I quickly accepted. I'd been to her house a few times before, especially when I was preparing for the geography competition. I loved going to Luna's for meals, but this time I had a feeling this would probably be the last time. Their neighborhood was run down, an old public housing complex that had been bought out by the residents. It was so old that the infrastructure was falling apart, and there were illegal structures everywhere. They lived on the 5th floor. The house was also a mess, with books everywhere. Textbooks, classic literature, books on autism. There were also many picture books scattered on the floor, always in the same spot every time I visited. Luna had told me that some things had to be kept in fixed positions or Zara would feel uneasy. That was part of her autistic rigidity. Luna liked things tidy but had to accommodate her daughter's needs. I helped Luna cook, and when I brought the dishes out, I saw Zara sitting in front of the TV. She was watching a documentary on outdoor survival, still expressionless, but she was looking up, focused. I found it strange. It was rare to see Zara looking up. Luna said that recently she had noticed Zara was very interested in outdoor documentaries, so she took her out a few times. She discovered that Zara was much more relaxed in nature, with strong practical skills. She could fish, weave grass mats, build simple stoves, and even learned how to start a fire by rubbing sticks together. Her personality had also become more open. Luna realized that this might be her daughter's talent, so they had been taking frequent absences to go out and explore nature. I was baffled. While I was suffering so much, they were out having fun, learning how to start fires. Zara's talent was being a caveman? How ridiculous. But I could only act pleasantly surprised and happily for Luna. Luna said that she had been too tense before, always pushing her daughter to learn this and that, trying to make her normal as quickly as possible. Her tension had made Zara tense too, which wasn't good for her treatment. Compared to being around people, Zara was much more comfortable in nature. Luna said she had finally realized that Zara wasn't suited for conventional schoolwork. From now on, she planned to take Zara out more often, learning through play. As a geography teacher, she was well equipped to teach about nature. Her family had a plot of land in the countryside, an old house that had been abandoned for years and was half collapsed. The area was surrounded by mountains and water, with beautiful scenery. She planned to rebuild a small house there and live there with her daughter. When Zara was younger, before she was diagnosed, she had loved visiting the countryside. Living there would be good for her treatment. Construction on the house had already started, and they had been visiting frequently to check on the progress. For now, they were taking it one step at a time. As long as Zara was happy, that was all that mattered. I asked Luna what she would do about her job. She said she'd figure it out later, or she could transfer to a school in the countryside. But that place was in a remote mountain area in a neighboring province. While it wasn't a poverty-stricken county, the economy was much worse than here. She was a top-rated teacher. Could she really be content with that? I stared intently at her expression, trying to find any hint of reluctance, but there was none. She had made this decision without hesitation. If they moved to the countryside, I might never see Luna again. The thought terrified me, but Luna seemed calm. Was she really so resolute? She had praised me for being smart and well-behaved, called me a good kid, but she didn't seem to have any attachment to me. I ate the meal in a daze, then stood in the middle of the living room, watching Luna clean up the dishes, bustling around. She walked back and forth near me, but it was like she was a phantom. No matter how close she got, I couldn't grasp her. It was like the mom I had seen in my feverish nightmares years ago. They would both leave me without a second thought. After dinner, Luna sat with Zara to watch the documentary, teaching her about outdoor survival skills, how to observe the terrain, identify plants and animals, use the Big Dipper to find directions, collect fresh water, and determine wind direction. Zara still didn't speak, but her expression softened a bit. She looked at the TV, then at her mom, but never at me. She completely ignored me. All those things I had whispered in her ear, she hadn't listened to any of it. Watching them so happy together, I felt even more lonely, more aware of how inseparable they were. I was just an outsider. This meal was indeed the last one. Luna thanked me sincerely for my help over the past 2 years and told me to focus on my studies. They were moving toward a new goal and probably wouldn't see me again. All my hard work had come to nothing. They were leaving. What would I do now? My only hope was gone. What should I do next? Nothing seemed worth doing anymore. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark night sky. No stars, no moon, no clouds. I thought about death. I looked down, but I couldn't see the ground below. My view was blocked by the security bars and the air conditioner unit outside. The story couldn't end like this. Zara didn't like me, I knew that. I remember one time, while I was explaining a problem to her, she suddenly wrote 3 words on a piece of scrap paper: "You stink." I was confused and asked her what she meant. She drew a cigarette and then looked up at me briefly before lowering her head again. In that moment, I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. She knew I used to smoke. When I was younger, after my mom left, I had given up on myself and skipped school to go to black market internet cafes. At the cafes, I had learned to smoke from the older guys there, but I only did it a few times and never got addicted. By middle school, I had decided to turn over a new leaf and become a good student. I thought I had left that part of my life behind. Who would know about it? But the truth was, what's done is done. It's not the same as if it never happened. The acrid smoke had once entered my lungs, leaving traces of nicotine. My breath was subtly different from others. Others might not notice, but Zara could. No matter how thoroughly I brushed my teeth or how much mouth spray I used, she could still smell it. That was why I had told Luna that Zara was very observant. I knew I could never completely escape my past. A flawed person could never become a perfect, good person. I was just a flawed kid. 2 months later, on a winter night, half asleep, I heard the roar of a fire engine. I looked out the window and saw a faint red glow on the horizon, staining the clouds. Smoke slowly rose, blending into the clouds as if the sky and earth had merged into one, like a dream. It was a terrible fire on the 5th floor of an old apartment building. A mother and daughter lived there. The fire broke out late at night, and due to poor management of the neighborhood, with illegal structures and cars parked haphazardly, the fire trucks were delayed, so the fire wasn't brought under control in time. Later investigations revealed that the fire had been caused by aging insulation on the air conditioner's wiring. The apartment was filled with books, which fueled the flames. That night, the wind was strong and the fire spread quickly. The official conclusion was that the fire was an accident. But was it really? As the Japanese mystery writer Edagawa Rampo once said, "The simpler the accident, the more likely it is to be a carefully planned murder. But I hadn't planned it carefully. I had just let nature take its course. The last time I had dinner at Luna's house, I had stood by the window and seen the old air conditioner unit and the frayed wires. The window was next to a bookshelf, and the house was filled with books, all potential hazards. Later, those wires and books kept appearing in my mind. They seemed to be telling me, let it go. Just let it go. That mother and daughter wouldn't be happy. They were just finding a new way to struggle through their suffering. I wouldn't be happy either. What was the point? On that windy night, I went to their neighborhood. The area had many blind spots for surveillance, and there was no one around. I stood in the darkness on the 5th floor, calmly smoking a cigarette. Then I put on gloves, climbed out of the stairwell window, and made my way along the building to the north-facing window, where the air conditioner unit was. I saw the frayed wire, the open window behind the security bars, and the books by the window. Everything was just right. I had started the fire. Afterward, no one suspected me, and the cause of the accident was exactly as I had predicted. I had thought that would be the end of it. But I hadn't expected things to take an unexpected turn. It was a wish I hadn't dared to hope for. Only one person survived the fire: Luna. Luna and Zara had separate rooms. Their rooms were next to each other. Luna had been sleeping in the north room, while Zara was in the south room. That night, the fire spread unusually fast, and the living room was quickly engulfed in flames. Most people know that if a doorknob is hot, the fire outside must be intense and you should never open the door. But Zara wasn't like most people. She was afraid of danger and wanted to find her mom, so she opened the door and was immediately swallowed by the flames. In the end, only Luna survived. This was both unexpected and logical. My reckless actions had somehow achieved the result I wanted. It was a gift from fate. A few days later, I attended Zara's funeral. Zara had been sick for a long time, and many people had kept their distance from the mother and daughter to avoid trouble, so there were very few relatives and friends at the funeral. However, a few relatives from Zara's father's side did attend. They whispered among themselves, casting scrutinizing glances at Luna. The police had briefly suspected her, as it wasn't uncommon for families overwhelmed by the burden of raising a child with autism to resort to drastic measures. But there was no evidence that Luna had reached her breaking point. She had indeed had moments of breakdown, but overall her attitude had been positive. Before the accident, she had been looking forward to a new life with her daughter. Anyone who knew her would say she was a good mother. The evidence at the scene also indicated that it had indeed been an accident. Anyone who understood the situation would sympathize with the mother's plight and view the incident in a positive light, as if fate had intervened to free the mother and allow the child, who didn't belong in this world, to return to the heavens. For a moment, I even wondered if what had happened that night had just been a dream, that I hadn't done anything wrong, and that my wish had simply come true. But the burns on my right index and middle fingers, where the cigarette had burned down to the filter without my notice, throbbed with pain. I quickly shoved my hand into my pocket and looked up in panic, only to see the portrait hanging above the altar. Zara's portrait was her school photo. I couldn't remember her face clearly anymore, but in that black and white photo, she stared at me expressionlessly, her gaze piercing. Only in moments like this would she look at me for so long. But this time, I was the one who wanted to look away. I glanced at her briefly and then immediately averted my eyes. Below the portrait was her coffin. There was no viewing of the body. She had been burned beyond recognition. It was all over. After the ceremony, I quickly walked over to Luna. Luna was overcome with grief, blaming herself for sleeping so soundly that night, for not realizing the fire sooner. I told her, "It's because you were so tired. You've been working so hard all this time." I helped Luna walk out of the funeral house. The sunlight was blinding, making my eyes hurt. After a brief moment of dizziness, I saw my dad's car parked by the roadside. He was leaning against it, waiting for me. He looked at me calmly, then at Luna, and said simply, "My condolences." Luna took a long leave of absence. I was in low spirits for a long time, often distracted during class. I kept wondering when Luna would come back. Several times I stood under her apartment building, looking up at the blackened windows on the 5th floor and the soot-stained walls. After the fire, Luna hadn't returned home. She had already planned to move, so she probably wouldn't repair the apartment. I didn't know where to find her, just like when my mom had remarried and I couldn't find her. I drifted through the days and a days. A month later, Luna returned to school. I rushed to her office to see her. She looked much thinner and her complexion wasn't great, but she smiled gently and said, "Jason, thank you." She had indeed given up on her old home, only going back to collect a few remaining belongings. The experience had been too painful for her, so letting go was the best option. Now she was renting a place alone, hoping that a change of environment would help her heal. The house in the countryside was still under construction, but Zara was no longer there. Luna hadn't stopped the construction, but there was no rush. I knew she would move on. She was a strong person. I should have been happy, but I wasn't. I just became more alert, naturally doing what needed to be done next. Naturally working toward fulfilling my unfinished wish. I told my dad, I want Luna to be my mom. My dad frowned and remained silent for a while before asking, Are you sure? I looked at him firmly, not saying anything more. My dad was direct and rough in his dealings with me, but when it came to pursuing women, he was surprisingly meticulous. He always considered the other person's feelings, patiently accompanying, listening, and communicating, gradually becoming the ideal partner in their eyes. Once they fully trusted him, he would start giving lavish gifts, sharing his life story, and showcasing his various strengths. While my dad was pursuing Luna, I was also studying hard. 6 months later, I was accepted into a top local high school, and my dad invited Luna over for dinner. Compared to half a year ago, Luna's mental state had improved significantly. This was her first visit to our home, marking a preliminary success in my dad's pursuit. I skillfully prepared a table of dishes that Luna liked. Luna was surprised that I was not only academically excellent but also skilled in household chores, so she was impressed. After dinner, I obediently reported my academic plans for high school to Luna, seeking her advice, and even prepared some teaching materials for her to review. Luna noticed that besides textbooks, there were a few psychology books on my bookshelf. She casually asked, Are you studying psychology too? I tried to stay calm and replied, I bought those online during a sale. I just flipped through them. Those books were ones I had specifically bought during my 3rd year of middle school. Back then, I had studied psychology to try to push Zara towards suicide. But psychology was too profound and I eventually gave up, choosing to take matters into my own hands. Over the past 6 months, I had picked up psychology again, this time to forget the past. No one knew how much effort I made for getting into a top high school. Not only did I have to study like crazy, but I also had to endure immense mental pressure, a side effect of the wrong I had done. It was a backlash from my conscience, a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Every night, Zara would appear in my dreams, making it impossible for me to sleep peacefully. Sometimes she was the frail figure sitting in front of me. I would tap her shoulder and she would turn around, her face featureless. Sometimes she was the black and white portrait hanging in the funeral house, her mouth turned down, her eyes staring blankly at me. Sometimes she was in the dimly lit office, being hit by her mother, her neck stretched out as she let out dry, emotionless wails, her face twisted into an unnatural expression. She would look at me and suddenly grin. Sometimes she was engulfed in flames, her skin peeling and charred, standing motionless in the fire, grinning at me. I had to rely on sleeping pills to get any deep sleep, but Zara would still appear in my dreams in the early hours of the morning. During the day, I needed stimulants to stay alert and keep up with my studies. Besides the homework assigned by my teachers, I gave myself extra assignments to fill in the gaps in my life. I kept studying, immersing myself in a sea of problems to avoid thinking about reality. On weekends, I would read psychology books, seeking inner peace. People have self-preservation mechanisms after experiencing great trauma, selectively forgetting certain things. It wasn't until a critical moment that I could fully recall the details. In any case, during the final stage of my 3rd year of middle school, I went through an extremely painful period, losing most of myself. Only then could I emerge from the shadows with barely healed wounds and return to a normal life. I got into my dream school and welcomed the mother I had longed for. Later, Luna often came over for meals, tutored me, and read with me. Time passed slowly. Another 6 months later, my dad and Luna got married, and I was finally able to call her Mom. For that one word, Mom, I didn't know what I had done over the years. After Mom moved in, the house became warmer. Although she couldn't truly love me yet, she knew how to create a harmonious family atmosphere. She had a strong ability to express love. I could finally relax, becoming more composed inside and out, like other kids from happy families. I no longer needed to hide anything or live in constant fear. I could enjoy Mom's love without guilt. The happiest moment of each day was coming home and shouting, Mom, I'm back. Mom would peek out from her room and respond. Just seeing her gentle smile made everything worth it. But all of this seemed too smooth. After everything that had happened, could life really be so peaceful? Mom still hadn't completely moved on from the past. She often gazed into the distance, silently crying, though she never mentioned Zara's name. She would also call her hometown from time to time, asking about the progress of the house construction. Whenever I heard her speaking in a hushed voice, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear. I was already in high school, taller than her, but I would still curl up on her lap like a child, asking why she still wanted to build that house. Mom would gently stroke my hair and say softly, "We have to keep some memories of the past. Why hold on to memories? Why not look forward?" But I couldn't do that either. The burns on my right fingertips had long healed, but they would occasionally throb with pain, a reminder of the past, evidence that could never be erased. Zara never left my dreams. Though her face had become blurry, the fear she brought remained. I could only keep telling myself, this was the best arrangement. I made an effort to learn everything about Mom and accept it all. I tried to understand her, to accept the house in her hometown. I leaned on Mom's knee and asked her what the village was like, what the old house looked like, how things had changed over the years. Mom answered me one by one. After talking, she seemed to feel better. During the summer vacation of my second year of high school, Mom took me to her hometown to check on the construction of the house. The place was remote, nestled in a mountain valley surrounded by water with beautiful scenery. But the village was in decline, with large fields lying fallow and overgrown with weeds. The young people had all left, leaving only a few elderly and children behind. Mom's house was mostly finished. The neighboring houses had either collapsed or been abandoned, so the area was eerily quiet. Mom inspected the house and, finding no major issues, decided not to stay long. She took me to stay in a nearby town. At night, we could see the Milky Way from the town. Mom and I sat on the roof of the hotel, gazing at the stars. Mom pointed to the northwest, showing me the Big Dipper, and then fell into a long silence. She was thinking about the time she had taught Zara about the stars. Facing the vast night sky, Mom finally opened up. She cried and told me how much she missed her. I was at a loss, only able to hold her hand and clumsily offer some words of comfort. I knew Zara's grave was in the hometown, but Mom was worried about me and hadn't brought it up. Now that her emotions had found an outlet, she couldn't hold back anymore. She said she wanted to visit the grave, and I immediately agreed. We went to grave the next morning. Zara's tombstone still bore the same photo, her mouth turned down, her eyes staring straight at me. The figure that often appeared in my dreams became real again. With just one glance, my legs went weak and I wanted to kneel, not daring to look up again. Mom focused on burning paper money and talking to Zara, not noticing my strange behavior. At one point, she received a call from Dad and walked away to answer it. Seizing the opportunity, I kowtowed 3 times to Zara. I buried my head in the grass and whispered, "Zara, let me go. Stop haunting me. I'm sorry for what I did, but I had no choice. I wanted a mom so badly. I've suffered too. Please let me go." My phone kept ringing in my pocket, but I didn't hear it. It wasn't until we left the grave that I absent-mindedly took out my phone and saw many messages from Dad, asking when we would be home. I replied, "In a few days." We had plenty of time during the summer vacation, so there was no need to rush back. I like being with Mom. We spent 2 more days exploring nearby scenic spots before heading home. When we got back, Dad didn't look happy. He didn't like how clingy I was with Mom, thinking I was too old to act like a child. But I didn't think that was the real reason. What he really didn't like was Mom. He wasn't close to her. In the 2 years since they had married, they had been polite but distant. He often looked at her with a scrutinizing gaze. From the beginning, it had been like this. When I told Dad I wanted Luna to be my mom, he had hesitated. Even though he eventually gave in, why had he hesitated? He had initially been interested in Luna and had even said that if she were single, things would be simpler. So why had he hesitated? Later, I couldn't hold back anymore and asked Dad why. Dad said, "Don't worry about it. Just focus on your studies." But the current situation made it seem like Dad didn't actually like Luna Lou and had only pursued her for my sake. What I had hoped for was a harmonious, loving family atmosphere, like the one we had before Dad's affair. My biological mother couldn't tolerate it and refused to turn a blind eye, but even with a new mom who knew nothing about Dad's past, we couldn't go back to how things were. Everyone seemed to have their own hidden thoughts. I asked Dad, "Do you have some misunderstanding about Mom?" "Misunderstanding? Not really," Dad said. "I can't simply judge someone as bad or good. Human nature is complex. Over the years, I haven't paid much attention to you, and you don't value my attention. Luna Lou is overall a good person and can be a good mom." I said, "She is good." But why did his words feel so uncomfortable? Dad looked at me meaningfully and didn't say more. We had similar conversations several times, but they always ended inconclusively. Then one time when we were out eating alone, Dad got carried away after drinking too much and started talking more. He said, I've seen children with autism. They seem cold, but they're actually very simple. That's just how they are. But for their families, it's a disaster. Having a child like that is despairing. If you wanted to get rid of such a child, is there a way? I think there is. They're like a blank sheet of paper that's hard to draw on, but if you keep drawing, eventually some marks will be left. For example, you could teach them certain common sense things but teach them the opposite. Keep teaching them and one day it will come in handy, like telling them that if there's a fire outside and the doorknob is hot, they should open the door. Dad said this in a cryptic way, not like he was joking. Dad, what are you talking about? I was shocked and angry. Mom isn't like that. Her love for Zara was real. She would never do something like that. You're not suggesting she started the fire herself, are you? The police said it was an accident. I said this with confidence because no one knew the real cause of the fire better than I did. But my thoughts spiraled out of control, realizing that Dad's method was eerily similar to what I had done, essentially inducing a mentally impaired person to end their own life. In the end, behind closed doors, what was the true nature of Mom and Zara's relationship? I had no way of knowing. At most, I had only peeked through the office window at school. But I was certain she wouldn't do such a thing. She was a good mom. Just talking, Dad said nonchalantly. I'm not questioning the official conclusion, and I don't think she's that kind of person. But human nature can't withstand too much testing. Families with autistic children are under immense pressure. The pain is unbearable for most people. Love for the child can erode over time, but responsibility only grows heavier. She might not have deliberately set the fire, but that doesn't mean she wouldn't take advantage of an opportunity. That accident was a good chance, wasn't it? She said she was so tired that she slept deeply and didn't realize the fire until it was too late. Is that really what happened? Zara opened her own door to look for her mom but couldn't open Mom's door. Does that mean Mom's door was locked from the inside? There were only the two of them at home. Why would she lock her door while sleeping? I retorted, You're not a firefighter. How do you know what happened? The fire was so big. If Zara opened the door, she would have been met with flames. She wouldn't have been able to reach the other room no matter how close it was. Even if, as you suspect, Mom locked her door. Who says you can't lock your door while sleeping? Dad, you can dislike her but you can't insult her character. She loved Zara deeply for over a decade. Before the accident, they had just found a new direction in life. She had discovered Zara's talent for outdoor activities and had taken her out to explore. They were planning to move back to their hometown, even if it meant giving up her current job. They were full of hope for a new life. Who could have predicted such a tragedy? Dad looked at me and remained silent for a long time. Just when I thought I had convinced him, he spoke calmly. If I wanted to kill someone without anyone knowing, creating an accident in the wilderness would be the easiest way. I would also start laying the groundwork well in advance, telling everyone how much we loved outdoor activities and hiking. As for moving back to the hometown, you've seen what kind of place that is. You know, I was on the verge of a breakdown, shouting, this is just a conspiracy theory. They've already suffered so much. Why make up these stories? If she were really as bad as you think, why would you have married her? Aren't you afraid she'd harm you? You don't really believe this nonsense. You're just making up stories for fun, aren't you? Typical of a greasy middle-aged man, drinking too much, full of dark humor. But Dad's expression remained calm the whole time. He said, I can't simply judge someone as bad or good. Human nature is complex and can't withstand too much testing. If Luna Lu really did intend to harm Zara, I could understand. I know she's a good mother just pushed to the brink. Now that the thing testing her is gone, she's naturally become more peaceful. I've given her a new life, brought her back to a normal state. What do I have to fear? Dad calmly ended the conversation, and a few days later, he went on another business trip, leaving me alone and unsettled. He had proposed 3 theories, none of them pleasant, all malicious speculation about Mother. But what scared me was that his speculations weren't entirely baseless. After that, Dad's words kept echoing in my mind. Those lingering doubts not only didn't disappear but became more pronounced. Once I accepted that possibility, my view of Mom subtly changed. Was she really like that? After Zara's death, she had been sad, but not as grief-stricken as I had expected. In just 6 months she had moved on. Another 6 months later she had started a new life. Were her tears more sorrow or guilt? Did she, at some point after her grief, feel relieved for the new life she had gained? Once I started thinking like this, my worldview began to crumble. The mom I loved wasn't supposed to be like this. She was supposed to be a strong, selfless, great mother. She wasn't supposed to be like this. The possibility that Mom wasn't perfect didn't lessen my guilt over Zara's death. Instead, It made me feel even more hopeless, as if all my efforts over the years had been built on a house of cards. I started deliberately avoiding Mom, and she seemed to notice, becoming more distant with me. It wasn't exactly coldness. Maybe this was just how things were supposed to be. It was just that I had been too enthusiastic before, and Mom had to respond in kind, giving me the illusion of deep affection. Now that I wasn't seeking her out, she didn't seek me out either. Her feelings for me had always been just like that. For years, I had been tormented by the guilt of causing Zara's death, clinging to the faint love I had managed to gain from Mom to maintain a fragile balance. But now, even that love was in jeopardy. I wasn't sure if I had ever truly had it, or if it was as pure as I had imagined. I was suspended in uncertainty, unable to move forward or back. I wanted to stay away from Mom, but I was also afraid of losing her. How could a person be so conflicted? I was in so much pain that I couldn't focus on my studies or my life. In the last few days of the summer vacation of my second year of high school, I locked myself in my room, spending my days in a daze, unable to sleep at night. I fell seriously ill again, burning with fever, delirious. In my half-asleep state, I heard Mom's footsteps nearby. I cried out for her, reaching out to grab her, babbling through my tears. But Mom just stood in the shadows, watching me coldly, unmoved. I was terrified she would leave again, begging her desperately not to go. In the end, she walked over and took my hand. I woke up to find Mom sitting by my bed. She was leaning over, using a cool towel to wipe the sweat from my forehead, feeding me fever reducers and water. Be silent the whole time. I called out, "Mom?" She didn't respond. I wanted to ask her something, but I was too exhausted and quickly fell back asleep. The next day, Mom returned to her usual self and my fever broke. After recovering from that serious illness, I seemed to have forgotten many things. I stopped obsessing over the uncertainty of Mom's love. I realized that some things really didn't need to be examined too deeply. Living in a haze could make life easier. I went back to clinging to Mom as before, and she responded positively. A new semester was about to begin. Time kept moving forward and everything would get better. As for that day, maybe I had just imagined it. The Mom sitting by my bed wiping my sweat looked so cold. Time flew by, and another year passed quietly. I didn't do well on the college entrance exam and was only admitted to an average university, but my parents seemed satisfied. After the first semester of my freshman year, I returned home for winter break and learned that the new house in Mom's hometown was finished. Dad was away on business, so I accompanied Mom to inspect the new house. On the long bus ride to the town, I dozed off as the vehicle bumped along into the night, deep in the mountains. The cold wind howled, and this winter seemed to overlap with a memory from the past. I dreamed of the past, unsure if it was fear or cold that made my body tremble uncontrollably. I curled up and moved closer to Mom. Mom handed me a coat and gently draped it over me. We didn't arrive until early morning. The rebuilt old house stood alone in the woods, its outline barely visible in the darkness, like some enormous, unknown creature. Mom opened the door, locked it behind us, and turned on the lights. The bright light hurt my eyes and I struggled to adjust. When I could finally see the room's layout, I was shocked. It was identical to the house that had burned down. Then a sharp pain shot through the back of my head and I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, it was already the next evening. I was sitting in the middle of the living room, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mom bustling around the house. She was taking many books off the shelves and scattering them around. Books were everywhere. I asked, "Mom, what are you doing?" I tried to stand up but found myself tied to a chair. Hearing my voice, Mom looked up and said calmly, "You're awake." My heart raced and I struggled against the ropes. I already had a pre-motion of what Mom intended to do. So I asked, "Do you know everything?" "Yes." But her expression remained calm, her brows unusually relaxed. Over the years, her brows had always been furrowed, leaving deep wrinkles. But now they were completely smooth, her gaze as compassionate as a Buddha's. I asked her, "When did you find out?" She said, "The last time we came here." The last time was during the summer vacation last year, when Mom had taken me back to her hometown. On the roof of the town's hotel, she had cried and said how much she missed her. She had said, "The fire was so big. She must have been in so much pain." I had clumsily comforted her, and the next day, we had gone to visit the grave. At that moment, I realized where I had slipped up. For years, I had been haunted by nightmares, my conscience burdened. Dad was often away on business and hadn't noticed anything unusual, but Mom was meticulous. She must have suspected something but lacked concrete evidence. That time when she took me to visit the grave, it had been premeditated. While at the grave, Mom had said Dad was calling her and walked away to answer the phone, leaving me alone by Zara's tomb. She knew that only when I was alone with Zara would I possibly reveal the truth, and I had done just that. The weight of my guilt had been too much to bear, and seeing Zara, I couldn't help but kneel. I kowtowed to her, confessing and begging her to let me go. My phone had kept vibrating in my pocket, but I hadn't noticed. At the time, I had been too distraught to realize another crucial detail. Dad's phone habits were old-fashioned. When he called, he would hold the phone to his ear, not texting at the same time. But my phone had kept buzzing with messages from Dad, asking when we would be home. This meant that the call Mom had walked away to answer wasn't from Dad. She had made the call herself. She had brought two phones, using one to call the other, placing one phone in the grass by the grave and pretending to answer the other, walking away. She had used this simple listening device to get the answer she needed. Thinking of this, I felt a sense of relief. I had been living in exhaustion for years, as if waiting for this decisive moment. I said, "You brought me here this time to kill me and avenge Zara, right?" As I said this, my heart ached. Mom didn't answer directly. Instead, she pulled up a chair and sat across from me. She said, "There are some things I want to talk to you." I was relieved that Dad's elaborate theories were all wrong, completely wrong. Mom has something to tell you. Today, let's talk about the past. Remember when you were in middle school and asked me when Zara last called me Mom? I told you it was 2 years ago. You were upset, not understanding why she wouldn't call me that more often, even though I treated her so well. But honestly, I was afraid of her calling me Mom, because usually she only called me that in emergencies. Zara was a simple yet cold child, with a strange tendency towards suicide. She could pick up on my emotional changes and think about ending her life, but when she was truly in danger, she would get scared and call for me. When she was 5, we finished a language intervention course and I went to renew it. The teacher suggested I try another program instead. I had to take Zara and leave. On the way home, I was deep in thought, silently. As we walked down the street, Zara suddenly broke free from my hand and ran into the road. I was terrified and chased after her, but a few speeding cars blocked my path. Those few seconds felt like an eternity. All I heard were horns and screeching brakes, and I almost couldn't bear to look. When the cars passed, I saw Zara standing on the median, frightened, calling out, "Mom." I rushed over and picked her up. Several drivers stopped and rolled down their windows to scold me, asking how I could be so careless with my child. I hung my head and quickly carried Zara away. That was the first time she had spoken, the first time she had called me Mom. I should have been happy, but it became my nightmare. A few years later, at a special school, she was bullied by other kids. I went to the school to talk to the teacher and didn't notice Zara leaving the office. A while later, I heard a commotion in the hallway and faintly heard a "Mom." Zara had climbed over the railing and was standing on the edge of the building, holding onto the railing. She let go, she would fall. In that moment, she was scared, frozen in place, gripping the railing and calling for me. My heart almost stopped. I instinctively rushed over and pulled her back inside. This happened several times, each time scaring me out of my wits. Later, to better protect her, I installed security bars at home, set up cameras in her room, and brought her to my school so I could keep an eye on her at all times. I told Zara over and over, "Mom loves you most. You must never try to kill yourself again. You have to live, don't give up." She didn't respond, but she listened. She was actually very observant. For a long time after that, she didn't attempt suicide again. In middle school, she worked hard at her studies. Gradually, I started expecting more from her. Then, in her 3rd year of middle school, I checked the camera one day and saw her trying to kill herself again. She was in her room, standing on something high, with a belt hung from the curtain rod. She calmly put her head through the loop, not scared, not calling for me, just silently trying to end her life. I rushed into her room and saved her. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had checked the camera a moment later. Afterward, I asked her why she had done it. Had she seen something? Had someone said something to her? She remained silent. I thought it must have been the pressure I put on her, and the environment of a regular middle school was too much for her. I kept thinking about how I was taking care of her now, but what would happen to her after I was gone? I kept pushing her to get better, to fit into society as soon as possible. But for her, it was too hard. She struggled in the world of ordinary people. I shouldn't have pushed her. As long as I was alive, I should have let her be happy. The future could wait. After that, I finally understood. I let go of her academics and took her out to play, to hike, to visit our hometown. Away from people, she was much more at ease. I let go of my obsessions and felt much lighter. We were looking forward to starting a new life back home. But then you ruined everything. It was so unexpected. How could things have turned out this way? My hands started trembling uncontrollably and my arms and shoulders shook too. Mom's eyes were as cold as ice. I couldn't look at her, so I stared at the ground, trying to process what she had just said. I never expected this. I never thought Zara really wanted to kill herself. She had so many chances to end her life, but Mom had always saved her. Mom had saved her many times, binding herself in the process, finally stabilizing her so she no longer had suicidal thoughts. But in my third year of middle school, every day during breaks I would whisper to her, telling her she was ruining Mom's life, that she should die and stop being a burden. I thought Zara hadn't listened, but she had. Mom thought it was her fault, but it wasn't. It was all because of me. Mom knew I had started the fire and hated me for it. If she found out that Zara's suicide attempt was also my doing, she would hate me even more. At this thought, tears filled my eyes. Mom didn't know what I was thinking. She continued, "You started the fire and destroyed everything." That night, I slept too deeply and woke up too late. For years, I had been so burdened with worries that I slept lightly. But during that time, I had let go of my obsessions and felt at peace, so I slept soundly, but I couldn't understand why I had slept so deeply that night. She covered her face, tears slipping through her fingers. After the fire, the police investigated, and I gave them the footage from the cameras in the house. I didn't dare watch it myself. For years, I couldn't bring myself to look. But I always had doubts. I didn't understand why Zara had opened the door. I had taught Zara about fire safety, clearly telling her that if there was a fire outside and the doorknob was hot, it meant the fire was intense and she must not open the door. I didn't understand why Zara had opened the door that night. The police told me it was because she was scared, opening the door to look for me. At the time, I was too grief-stricken to question it further. But later I realized something was wrong. When Zara was scared, she would freeze in place and call for me. She wouldn't actively run to find me. The police had seen the camera footage and knew the truth, but they lied to me, just telling me to live well. So what was on that footage? For years, I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I couldn't face the truth. Mom couldn't control herself and broke down crying. "Don't cry," I said. I twisted my body, trying to move toward her, to comfort her, but I couldn't. I struggled to breathe and said, "You did watch the footage later, didn't you? What happened in Zara's room that night? Mom, tell me." Mom let out a bitter laugh and wiped her tears. She tried to control her emotions, then picked up a book from the floor and lit it on fire. A flame flickered and her face flickered in and out of the light. She said, "I'll tell you, don't worry. After I finish, we'll go together and apologize to her." As Mom spoke, she carried the burning book to different parts of the room. Wherever she went, flames rose and soon the entire room was engulfed in fire, all exits blocked by the blaze, waves of heat rolling through. It was a winter much like the one before. In this winter, Mom would kill me and herself, taking us both to atone for Zara's death. The flames of karma surrounded us, leaving no way out. She returned to the center of the living room and sat back down in the chair across from me, her expression calm and composed, as if she had transcended the pain of the mortal world. In a voice devoid of emotion, she revealed the final truth. The truth was so cruel. The bad thing I had done in middle school had seemed like no big deal at the time, and I had been relieved that no one found out. But in the years that followed, I often woke up from nightmares. No matter how many nightmares I had, no matter how much pain and fear I felt, I never thought about killing myself. I kept telling myself that this was the best arrangement and over time I would move on. But when I learned the full truth, I was so desperate that I wanted to die. The camera had worked until the last moment before it was destroyed, transmitting the final images in real time. What had really happened that night was all recorded. Zara had gotten up and walked to the door, finding the doorknob hot. She knew about fire safety, so she immediately stepped back and didn't open the door. But she was scared, so she froze in place and called out, "Mom." She only called once, then stopped. She knew that in such a situation she shouldn't call out, in case Mom, in a panic, opened the door to save her and was met with the flames, putting herself in danger. But even if she didn't open the door, staying in the room was also very dangerous. She stood still for a while, then walked to the window and stared at the swaying tree shadows outside. During their hikes, Mom had taught her how to determine wind direction in the wild. It wasn't hard, just look at which way the branches were swaying. That night, the wind was strong, blowing from the northwest toward the southeast, and her room was on the southeast side. Mom slept in the north room and Zara slept in the south room. Mom had given her the room with the best light, hoping the sunlight would make her happy. But sunlight couldn't penetrate her heart. Her entire life, she had walked alone in the shadows. That night, facing the raging fire, Zara made her final decision to die. This time she had no choice. She wanted to save Mom. To save Mom in that moment and to save Mom for the rest of her life. She knew the wind was blowing toward her room. This was her only chance. She opened all the windows on the east side, then walked to the door and opened it. In that moment, the north window in the living room and the east window in her room created an air current, and the wind, carrying flames and smoke, found its only exit. The fire rushed in the direction of the wind, briefly passing the north room before surging toward the south, forcing Zara to retreat step by step into her room. When she was backed into a corner, she seemed to finally feel true happiness. She danced, her body engulfed in flames, and ran to the doorway, waving her arms as if inviting guests. She shouted, "Fire, fire! Come here, don't burn my mom!" A mournful, eerie cry from the depths of hell. This was the real reason Zara died and the real reason Mom survived. I had thought that by starting the fire, I was burning away the rotten past and bringing about a new beginning. I had thought this was the best ending and start. How could I have thought that? How could I have arrogantly judged their lives and presumptuously manipulated their fates? I was so despicable. That girl had wanted to live, but I had pushed her to the brink. She had finally mustered the courage to live, but I had tried every way to induce her to kill herself. She had known how to handle the fire, had already withdrawn her hand from the doorknob, but had been forced to open the door herself. Mom had finally been able to sleep well. They had been about to start a new life. She hadn't needed to sacrifice herself to save Mom. They could have happily moved into that little house by the mountains and water, gone fishing, had picnics, watched the stars. They shouldn't have faced such a tragic end. But I had intervened, snuffing out that fragile hope. What had I been doing? Who was I? What did any of this have to do with me? Why had I meddled in their lives? When I realized the truth, I opened my mouth wanting to cry, to scream, but no sound came out. I had been abandoned by the world, left in a vacuum. I didn't deserve to make a sound, didn't deserve to be fought for by Mom, didn't deserve to be loved. Everything I had longed for was just wishful thinking. My heart ached so much I thought I would vomit it out. The flames drew closer, burning through the ropes that bound me. I broke free and stood up. Mom looked at me in horror and shouted, "No, how can you?" I walked up to her and called her Mom for the last time. I said, "Mom, don't die. I'll die instead." I took off my coat, wrapped it tightly around her, and despite her kicking and struggling, I picked her up. I shielded her with my body, then head down, braved the flames and rushed out of the house. Outside it was nighttime, but the area was bustling with noise. I set her down in a safe spot. Several villagers had gathered, carrying buckets and basins to put out the fire, but it was too big and their efforts were futile. Now they cheered, relieved that we were safe. I looked deeply at Mom and said, "I'm leaving." She looked up dazedly, her grip on my arm tightening, then loosening. I brushed her hand away and turned back toward the fire. That was where I belonged. In the end, I died in that fire. My soul left my body and lingered briefly in the mortal world. I wandered through time and space, finally recalling the past I had forgotten. Only at this point I could understand the full story. I saw the mother and daughter who had suffered so deeply, saw my shameful life, saw my dad kneeling by the ruins of the fire, crying uncontrollably. But my heart was calm. In my short life, I had been blind to what I already had, only coveting love that wasn't mine. Even now, with my heart burning, all I could think about was Mom. I knew that after doing such a terrible thing, I was destined for hell. I only hoped that by going to hell I could give Mom some peace so she could live well and never be sad again.